Welcome, Traceable Designers. Today we're making an elegant silk pillowcase valance. This is the scallop style and it will have a continuous rod pocket. I'm using a standard size silk pillowcase. We'll be making a center panel only style. I'm also going to make a small center panel, 38 inches wide. You can make up to 44 or even 46 inches wide with some adjustments. I'm also making a 2-inch wide rod pocket rather than the 3-inch. So my pillowcase has a zipper, so we'll turn the pillowcase inside out, and then I'm going to remove the zipper first. Then you can just run an iron over the seams if you need to in order to flatten them, and then we'll just cut the seams on both sides of the pillowcase to completely open the fabric section. Once you have your fabric prepared, run a dry iron over your fabric. With silk, you have to be very careful not to use a high temperature or it will burn, and you don't want water in your iron either. So use the silk setting or a lower setting and just test the fabric and take your time with it and make sure you don't burn your silk. To size your fabric, fold the fabric section over and then position the design form sizing line on the folded fabric edge. I'm making a small panel, so I will adjust my fabric by cutting a section that is about 2 inches wider than needed. I am adjusting the rod pocket, so when you typically make the cornice style valance for the center panel, it does fold over the rod, raising it by about an inch. So I'm going to position my lining where it would typically be the proper depth. And so we're looking at about 4 inches total, so I'm dropping down an inch below the lined fabric positioning marker and then adding about 3 inches above for the 4 inches total. So for this adjustment, I need to position my fusible backing properly, making sure that I have plenty of room on top for my no-sew rod pocket. So once I have the fusible backing in place, I'm anchoring it in the middle because it's right now too long for the fabric panel. Make sure with the silk, because it moves, you've got a lot of even space on top. You really have to be careful with the silk because it is a little bit slippery. So I'm anchoring the top of my fusible backing, then going down and folding the backing so that it is inside of the fabric edge, and then I'm just cutting off the excess from the bottom, and then I'll use that for my rod pocket. So then just go back into the middle of the fabric and sweep from the center out. Very important that you always sweep from the center out, especially when you're doing the silk. You want to make sure that your iron is low. If your fusible backing is not fusing, raise your iron heat just a little bit. Of course, there's no steam, no water in your iron, and then just progress out toward the sides. Then you'll turn your panel over, and what you're looking for is some buckling. Usually when you're using a lower iron, you may have a little buckling. So it's very important you sweep center out to push those buckles out toward the side to remove them. Then once the paper has completely cooled, you'll be able to peel that off, and then we'll move on to attaching the lining to the exposed glue. Remember to fold your paper and reserve that for attaching trim. For my lining, I'm using a 100% cotton white pillowcase, and I will cut that as we did with the silk pillowcase in order to get my section for my lining. Make sure you have a nice straight edge across the top. Then we're going to align the lining right across the top edge of the glue, and again, starting in the center, sweeping out toward the sides, we're going to start to attach the lining. So remember to take your time with your lining, sweeping from the center out. Since your heat is so low, to avoid burning, you're going to have to move slowly, sweeping from the center out until the lining has completely fused to the back of the fabric. Just keep checking it to make sure that it's securing. If you do need to raise your temperature a bit, you can, but just take your time. It will eventually adhere. And then again, flip it over and sweep from the center out to remove any buckles in your fabric, but do it very carefully on the front side of your fabric since the silk can burn easily. Now you'll fold your fabric section in half and make sure the top edge of the lining is even on the front and back, and then use a pin to secure that so that it doesn't move when you're tracing. Position your sizing line on the folded fabric edge, making sure you're lifted up enough that the lining is secured below the lower edge. And you can see here that my lined fabric positioning marker is about 1 inch above my lining top edge, because that will shorten the panel as it would if it was folding over top of a wide pocket rod for the cornice style. Then starting on the right side, just trace around the design form, making sure not to move it from the correct line on the folded edge. Make sure you can really see your line for cutting. Then just continue around all the way down to the folded edge, and then you'll go up the right side and we'll trace the rod pocket section. Since the fabric is silk, it's a little bit more difficult to trace across the rod pocket section, so you have to take your time with this. Then lower the design form, making sure you do have 4 inches above the lining section, and then you're going to position the left side of the design form on the folded edge so you make sure that's nice and straight. And then you can trace across the top edge of the design form to straighten out the rod pocket section. And again, the silk does move. It's a little bit more difficult to trace, but you can take your time and get the mark there so you can see where your cut line will be. So to make it a little easier to cut, I like to turn the folded edge toward me and then just press down as you carefully follow along the traced line to cut out your valance. Make sure you get your curves nice and even. If you pin the fabric, it really does help prevent the movement. So follow around the traced line until you've completely cut out your panel, cutting up the right side and across the rod pocket section. Then to straighten out your rod pocket, turn the cut side toward you and cut straight across that line to make that a nice and even rod pocket top edge. Then you can open your panel, and if you'd like, you can run an iron over the fabric one more time before you attach your trim and make your rod pocket. To make your rod hanging pocket, turn the unlined fabric section toward you and then fold over the section of fabric to meet the top edge of the lining. It doesn't have to overlap, and then you'll just run an iron across this fabric section to make sure that that lays nice and flat. So be careful. Again, your iron can stick to the silk. You want to be very careful not to burn your fabric. So you're going to cut a piece of fusible backing that will fit inside that folded section. You don't want it to overlap onto the lining, and you don't want it to overlap onto your ironing board, or you'll be depositing glue on the ironing board, which can get on the front of your valance. So follow along and secure the fusible backing to the back of the pocket, and then once that has completely cooled, you'll be able to peel that paper off and then finish your rod pocket. To finish the rod pocket, you're going to be putting quite a bit of heat through that folded fabric section. So you folded the glue over top of the back lining, and then you'll be pressing with the heat until that fuses together. So if you use a piece of lining, you'll find it might be easier to prevent burning the fabric while you're getting that rod pocket to secure. Okay, to finish my valance, I'm going to use fringe. So I have a ball fringe here. So the most important thing is that my center ball that's hanging down is centered in the middle of the panel. So to size my trim, I'm going up the right side to make sure I have plenty of trim all the way up to the edge, extending an inch or two above. And then I'll go on the left side and follow along the same edge to make sure that I have my trim properly sized for my panel before I cut. I'm using a tube glue because my fringe is relatively heavy, and I'm using Aleene's Stronghold glue here. I love this. It holds really, really well. It dries clear, and it is something that you can use for heavier fringe or trim, and it works fantastic. So as you're running the glue along the edge, I like to go up around the curves and then always put the cap back on the glue so that you don't get it on your ironing board or on the front of your valance. So working in sections, just position the trim right along the edge and up around the curve, and then do little small sections of glue as you progress. If you are proficient with a glue gun, you can use that as well. And if you are using a tube glue, make sure it's a really good strong one so that you can make sure that your fringe will hold and not eventually separate. You won't be able to use the iron-on method when you're using silk. at all for any trim because you will wind up burning your fabric. So make sure you use a tube glue of some type or a glue gun. So just progress along following your curves. You'll do both sides, and then when you come to the end, you will have, if you have an extra ball on the fringe, you'll just snip that off, and then you'll secure the trim behind the panel so that that's glued nice and secure. Then just slip the rod right into the rod pocket and you'll be ready to hang your beautiful single panel silk scallop valance. Thank you for joining me, Traceable Designers, and remember, you can always make your mark with Traceable Designer.